Hi everyone, my name is Ryan D'Amato. If I were to ask you how would you define your generation, many of you would probably say, I don't know. Today I'm going to talk to you about defining generations and how we can make this issue better. Through explaining the different generations, problems with defining each generation, and the ways that I believe we can better define them. Now you may be wondering why I'm talking about this. I'm talking to you about this because I believe that the way we define generations is a big issue. Now on to my first point, the different generations. There are quite a few generations in which all fall in between a certain time period and age group. One type of generation is the baby boomers, in which is the largest generation besides the millennials. According to Barnes, people born in this generation were born between 1946 to 1964. These people are between either in the mid-50s or early 70s. Another generation is Generation X, which is the generation after them, and they, after baby boomers, and are between 1965 to 1981. These individuals are either in their late 30s or early 50s. The last example of generations is the millennial generation, also known as Generation Y, and they fall in between the years of 1982 to 2004. These people fall between ages of 14 to their mid-30s. Now let's talk about the problems with defining generations. There are many problems with defining generations because each generation always hates on the other. Defining generations is like describing different races. Each generation comes up with its own stereotypes to define that generation. For example, the millennial generation gets hated on the most. According to Barnes, the stereotypes used to define the millennial generation are millennials do not value face-to-face contact the way other generations do. Millennials are not quite as committed to their work. And millennials are dependent on all forms of technology. Another example of stereotypes of a generation are the people of the Generation X, in which Julie Rose says that Generation X is unfazed by authority and skeptical and negative. The last stereotypes of a generation is the stereotypes of baby boomers, which according to Julie Rose is that baby boomers live for their jobs. Now on to how we can better define generations. I firmly believe that we can define generations better. One way I believe we can do this is by stopping to notice that there is a lot to admire about each generation. According to Robin Stratton-Buckersell in her article, she says, when we let go of judgment, we achieve far more because we focus on what is being experienced in the moment. Without preconceptions, we can appreciate one another and listen to what each person is truly saying instead of investigating energy into stereotyping people based on prior assumptions or prejudices. I also believe that we can better define generations by taking the time to listen to a person from a different generation than you are. And understand what difficulties or even changes that may have occurred in their lifetime. And these may have changed your view on this generation. As Sharon Buckasell says, remember a truly positive experience you had with a person from a different generation. The situation may have been at work or at home. This positive experience may have shifted your perspectives about this generation, making you feel good about yourself. One last other way that you can define generations is by, instead of taking a look at what a few individuals within that generation do, focus more on the accomplishments and decisions that each generation makes. Like Barnes said, I know, for instance, many baby boomers who are geeky about technology. At the same time, I also know some 50-year-olds whose commitment to their work is less than exemplary. There are individuals of every age who break the mold. Today I talked to you about how we define each generation and how we could better define them in the future. Through the different generations and the stereotypes that people make about each generation and the ways that in which we define these generations. I talked to you about this because I believe that defining generations is a big issue in today's society, in that we can better define them through admiring each generation, listening to another person from each generation to get a better understanding of one another, and taking a look at generations' accomplishments and decisions, not certain individuals within that generation. I encourage you all now to go out and whenever you meet someone from a different generation, to use these techniques that I've mentioned to help create a future where everyone accepts one another for whom they are, not just as individuals or small groups of people, but as an entire generation. Thank you.